call this a good day on the campaign?
Oh, it's just another day in the hustings, and you've got to expect this. But the Prime Minister's right. This is nothing new. This debate was settled before Christmas. The National Party made a position very clear that we were going to support net zero by 2050, and Matt's position was contrary to that. It's nothing new. And while he may want to prosecute it, the world's moved past Matt Canavan. We're moving on with this, and let me tell you why. Had we not signed up to this, you would have had a carbon tax, you would have had a plan that would not have protected those traditional jobs the way we are. Those traditional jobs will stay there for some time to come because it's a practical plan, not about ideology, but about practical application and living up to our international commitments. The other big piece of this is we've all got to remember is had we not signed up to this, our commodity prices would have been taxed at the borders as we sent them, and so we would get less for our commodities, particularly in the agricultural sector. But you'd also, as Treasury outlined, would be paying somewhere between 1.5–3% more on your borrowings, whether that's a home loan, business loan or agricultural loan. So we're saying while Clive Palmer and Pauline Hanson might want to say we shouldn't have signed up, they might be able to afford an extra 3% on your mortgage, but can you? So this was a practical application of a policy that will mean that we are driving down those costs, keeping our commodity prices up and paying the bills while living up to our international commitments. It's an eminently sensible plan. The National Party signed up to it, and we are locked and loaded to make sure that we live up to that commitment as a party and as a coalition.
The world's moved past Matt Canavan, you say. Has anyone told him that?
Oh, look, I've had a conversation with Matt this morning and made it clear that obviously we respect his right, and that's the culture of the National Party, is that those in the National Party are still able to prosecute their own views. We respect that, but ultimately he's part of a team, a National Party team that made a determination in December, I think the right one, and one that we came together and had a very mature conversation about those facts, about protecting those traditional jobs that Matt's passionate about, but also making sure that Australians didn't foot the bill for it. Because I don't think there's too many Australians that could afford an extra 3% on their mortgage, or businesses or even farm loans, an extra 3% because you wanted to tell the world to get stuffed. We've got to understand our place in the world. We have to trade with the world. We're a nation of 26 million people. We produce enough food and fibre for 80 million. So if we don't engage with the world, we don't trade with the world, then we ultimately do pay. And that's the practical reality of it. And while you might get a warm, fuzzy feeling saying, tell the world to take a running jump, we've got to understand our place in the world and what's going to pay the bills here. And being sensible about this, being mature about this is what the National Party and the Coalition has put forward in terms of its policy.
OK, but what's Matt Canavan saying? Because millions of voters in Queensland are looking to him at the moment. He's either lying to the electorate or making promises that you're not being upfront with. Which is it?
No, Matt's passionate about protecting jobs, traditional jobs, and what he's concerned about is if the Labor Party gets in. They've made a 2030 commitment and a 2050 commitment well beyond ours, but if they're in coalition with the Greens are saying we have to get to 75%. Labor's saying 43%. Now, they're going to have a discussion about where they get. The coalition's already had that discussion. We've committed by 2030, 26 to 28%. Labor's somewhere between 43 and 75%. So what Matt's concerned about is the acceleration of this and how quickly this could actually impact. And if you're going to shift the dial quickly, then those traditional jobs will be the ones that will be impacted. What we're saying is we have an eminently sensible plan. A plan that will protect those jobs, will look to technology like carbon capture storage, like hydrogen, those types of things that will continue to drive down our emissions, keep people in jobs and protect those regional areas as they have grown over so many years. That's what Matt's concerned about. And while he appreciates and sees the challenges globally, he's passionate about that. And I think that's a good thing. I thought it'd be great. I think that's great that we've got politicians that are passionate. Now, while we don't always agree on how we get there, I think Matt's core principle is that he wants to protect jobs. And that's the conversation I had with him this morning. He's passionate about those people in regional Australia. And that's what the Nats represent. We're not interested in representing capital cities. There's plenty of politicians down there. We're just worried about those regional Australians, and that's what Matt's concerned about. But we've made a decision as a party room and we're moving on with it, and it's a sensible solution that will protect those jobs.
Yes, but he's a former resources minister. He has the ear of Barnaby Joyce. He has a huge platform. He's not afraid of using it. What's to say, if you're elected for another term, that he won't try and change your policy? Is there any guarantees here? We know that the Nationals agreement is renegotiated every single election.
Well, because the National Party room is the majority, not Matt Canavan. Matt Canavan is but one voice in that party room. And we made that decision as a party room. We're sticking to that.
Is he alone
decision.
in this, though?
Well, that's a discussion you have to have with other party members. But I'm not going to disclose what happened in our party room. But we, as a clear majority, decided that this was the way to move forward because you were going to pay more on your mortgage, up to 3% more on your mortgage. Had we not done this, you would have got less for your commodities. And while there are people that have divergent views, I respect that. But ultimately, the body that will determine our policy is not Matt Canavan. It's our party room. The sanctity of our party room is prime in terms of the decisions and the policy we move forward. Yeah. If there's those within that party room that doesn't agree with that, that's their position. We respect that. But as a party room, we've made that determination. It is time to move on and it's time to focus on making sure that Australians' economy is a secure one for them to have jobs, whether it be in regions or in metropolitan Australia.
Did your government introduce a carbon tax by stealth when it introduced a safeguard mechanism?
No. And that was about making sure that we had a mechanism whereby we lived up to our international commitments and we knew the guide rails in which we could work within, and industry knew the guide rails in which they had to work within. Because it's not just government that actually reduced the emissions, it's everyone has a role to play in this, and this was making sure that those guide rails were there, industry could work with confidence. And what we've said is we're not going to move those guide rails. We're leaving them there, but what Labor's saying is they're going to move those guide rails in, and what that means is that puts pressure. That puts pressure on the acceleration of business to try and cut emissions at a cost, and that cost has to go back to the Australian consumer, because this isn't, the safeguard mechanism isn't a progressive tax where you're taxed in terms of your income. This is an arbitrary tax that you will pay on your emissions. So it is a carbon tax in which if they are bringing that in tighter, they are saying to industry, you have to move quicker and accelerate what you're doing to reduce emissions. You have to do the heavy lifting. And what that does is put pressure on businesses.
Is a safeguard mechanism a tax or not?
Well, if it actually, where it sits at the moment, it's not a tax, because what we're saying is we kept the guide rails out.
So it's only a tax if it works. Is that right?
Well, if you're paying, it's a tax, exactly. So, but if you're shrinking that in, it becomes a real tax. What it does is it goes from being guide rails that they can work within and giving time to work within. But what Labor's doing is shrinking those guide rails in to become a tax, because if they're shrinking those guide rails in, it then means that people have to pay it. And if they have to pay it, they have to pass it on. So where we've kept the guide rails is we've said we don't want to stick. We're just saying these are the guide rails. No one's has been imposed on this. We've simply worked through this slowly and calmly to get to that net zero by 2050, and the other achievements we've done, which is reduce emissions by 20% since 2005, which we should all be proud of. But we're not going to accelerate that. But once you bring those guide rails in, up goes the tax, because you're accelerating what business has to do. And so this is the challenge we've got. They're accelerating.
You're assuming that business would pass this cost on, though. Is that where the tax component comes in? Wouldn't they absorb it?
They're going to have to. Why would they absorb it? I mean, no business is going to do that. This isn't a progressive tax,
profitable industries making
this isn't a progressive
transition
tax.
Because they need to.
No, this isn't a progressive tax where a normal tax, you get taxed on your profit. Okay. This is an arbitrary tax that it's based on emissions, not on profit. So, but if a company's not making profit, they've still got to pay it. And so if you're not making profit, you go out of business. So effectively, to make sure you can stay in business, you reduce costs somewhere else. And one of the biggest costs to every business is employment, is wages. And so what are they going to do? They're going to shift the dial on their businesses. That's how businesses operate. That's the practical reality. And this is where you've got to get away from all this ideology and understand the practical application of these policies. But isn't that how net zero emissions
work as well, giving them that framework where they need to adjust and therefore there's always a cost? I mean, this whole idea that
and that's what we're doing.
This is zero cost in driving down emissions is a fantasy. You're doing the same thing. You've got a net zero emissions target.
No, we're not, Laura. Exactly, but we're using technology.
Are you saying that's cost-free, though?
No, what I'm saying is that's partnership with businesses, and we've got billions of dollars over the forwards, into $20 billion over the forwards over the next 10 years to partner to leverage.
Sorry to interrupt, but Labor would argue that this safeguards mechanism that they've put in place, and the one they did it in consultation with business. This is what business has asked for. The Business Council backs it in.
No.
The Business Council backs it in.
Laura, I wouldn't go that far. The Business Council looks after a very few. You've got to understand this broadens the net and makes more businesses pay, many in which the Business Council don't represent. So with all due respect to the Business Council, they might be able to afford it, but there's plenty that don't. But what we're saying with our commitment towards net zero is that we're doing it eminently sensible and calmly, with leveraging the investment that will come from private capital with Australian capital to make sure that we're investing in technology that will protect those jobs and will drive down the cost of implementation. That's the common sense way to try and achieve net zero, to make sure we're part of the global community, that our interest rates stay down and that our commodity prices stay high. That's the sensible way to do it, rather than just have an ideology that arbitrarily is trying to accelerate that. That means that businesses don't have the time to adjust. They're just simply going to have this put across them, and all of a sudden that's coming out of their income, not out of their profit. It's not a progressive tax. It's a tax that hits them straight up off their income, and it goes straight off the bottom line. And so businesses make decisions about how do they keep their businesses afloat. And I've been in business. Okay. I know what you have to do. They're the tough decisions, and it's the human toll of this that we've got to appreciate. And while people in metropolitan areas don't necessarily always get it, there is a human toll to this, and most of those live out in our part of the world. And that's why we get exercise. We want to be part of the global community, but we've got to do this sensibly.
Hey, good to have you back on the program, David Littleproud. We'll speak soon. Let's do it again.
Thanks for having me, Laura. Yeah, anytime.